Xbox's Icarus moment, how Microsoft went third party. This is a video made by Colin Moriarty. It's posted on the Last Stand Media YouTube channel. I watched a little bit of it yesterday back and forth, but I wanted to go ahead and see if we can take what I think is a microscope and scrutinize a video that has a lot of claims about Microsoft and see where Microsoft's weaknesses are, if Microsoft is able to compensate for it, or if Xbox is actually going downhill. And if, anyways, third party is a bad thing. Because, you know, this word third party these days is used in this console conversation like it's a slur. Like, you know, basically the hard slur, because, again, if you're a first party developer and a first party publisher, it's almost a sin for you to actually publish your games elsewhere if you're Microsoft. But if you're PlayStation, it's fine, and there are caveats that allow for you to do it without any resistance from the talking media.
The NES era, and obviously it's related, but here I'm referring to Icarus, the son of the craftsman Daedalus. In the myth, Daedalus constructs a labyrinth, which he himself ultimately gets trapped in alongside his boy. To escape, he ingeniously concocts two sets of wings for he and his son, but there's a massive problem. The wings are made of metal, leather, and most importantly, wax. Knowing that his young child would be overcome with the excitement of flight, Daedalus issued Icarus a strong warning. Fly low and carefully and survive to see another day. But Icarus didn't listen. He flew higher and higher, more and more enraptured by the allure of his immediate circumstances. Thus, what Daedalus feared came to pass. Icarus's wings melt, and he falls into the water below, drowning soon thereafter. The idiom we use today to check people on their inherent ambition and even greed, flying too close to the sun, hails from this ancient myth, and it perfectly describes what Microsoft has done with Xbox, which is very much now a third-party brand with a console nebulously attached to it.
Now, I have to say, Game Pass in Microsoft's own, ecosystem, is he saying that it's as a result of them being too ambitious and greedy? Or is the reality that Game Pass was formed out of desperation to stay alive and survive by providing the customer with what I deem, or what anybody deems, the best value proposition that you can actually find out there? I think that's where the difference is, because yes, the Icarus analogy is designed, or I guess that the Icarus story is told to pretty much, point out that greed and ambition can basically kill you or destroy you. However, what we've seen with Game Pass is that it's actually destroyed the competitor's own value proposition. Let me show you. It's a threat to them, right? When Insomniac got hacked, what we saw about Game Pass is that it's actually a threat to PlayStation, and PlayStation can do it. In the case of Icarus flying all the way to the sun was a threat to no one except himself. So this analogy already, I can see a very interesting, imbalance at the end of the day. And again, maybe this is just, Colin's interpretation of the situation, but it's not reality in my mind or in my opinion. And again, I have no stake in this particular conversation as somebody who plays on Steam, and looking at how Steam has positioned itself. It's because of its value proposition, and Xbox is doing the same thing. But console manufacturers have not been known to be pro-consumer. Xbox taking that direction has now put them in the crosshairs of PlayStation users, where they're now basically pointing to them as Icarus. I can't imagine doing something pro-consumer as being considered greedy. I don't know where he gets that from. But let's keep going.
Like Icarus's handcrafted wings, Microsoft tenuously crafted an escape for its beleaguered ecosystem, but it got way too greedy.
How? I'm curious how they got way too greedy. This is the one piece of the puzzle that I'm trying to wrap my mind around. Let's ask the question very critically. Okay, here this is where we apply critical thought, critical thinking. Microsoft has taken its games to other gamers on PC. That was the very first move it made. As it took its games there, it sold it at a fair market value for everyone else. It was willing to split a 30% fee with, Steam and take 70%. So it took less money, but was willing to go ahead and take it, while PlayStation and Nintendo have maintained their own control of their ecosystem as long as they could. PlayStation is now cracked and its games are now on PC. But Microsoft is willing to take its games like Forza, Halo, and these other games to those ecosystems day one, offering gamers something that they could play, right? And then in the middle of the Xbox One generation, somewhere around there, they decided they were going to go ahead and kick off Game Pass to offer more value to gamers because they understood something that value was the big deal for a number of gamers who would be willing to dial into their ecosystem. How is that too greedy? How is that a result of greed? How is that translating to greed? Am I missing something? When Game Pass increased its fees, it had already added a significant number of games where you could actually see the value to them. You could run the numbers and run a calculation and say, okay, these are the number of games that I'm getting on Game Pass. Like you can literally go ahead and say, okay, so here on Game Pass, let's go ahead and do some math. And I said we're going to run this through a lot of scrutiny because, you can make a claim all you want, but if that claim cannot withstand scrutiny, then maybe the claim needs to be revised, right? I can take my calculator here and I can start punching in numbers of all these other games. And Madden 2025, $50. I'm just doing an average. Ninja Gaiden Black, $50. Sniper Elite Resistance, $50. Avowed, $50. What is the name of this game? Over here, Citizen Sleeper, $30. Indiana Jones, $60. Call of Duty from last year, when it came out in October, let's just say $60. And I paid for Game Pass an average of about $120 a year. So from just October, if I subscribe to Game Pass with a 3-month bundle that you can get on CD Keys or Key websites for very minimal, actually, about less than $30, to be honest, and I subtract $120 from Game Pass from this fee from October to February, just counting a handful of games, not all the games, a handful of new games, or even a handful of games that are already on my ecosystem, I've already basically saved myself $230. To buy those games, I would have spent $350. And this is not including other games that are coming to the ecosystem, like Claire Obscure Expedition 33, which is a $50-ish game. I'm just doing $50, right? Doom Dark Ages, which is $60, which has release dates, by the way. I'm going with what has release dates. I'm not going with, future games. I'm not going with, games that may be coming someday or, games that we're not yet sure about what's going on, right? And then I look at Stalker, if I want to play this, another $60. And then I look at Flight Simulator, another $60. I don't know where greed is coming from because, again, mathematically, from a value proposition standpoint, creating Game Pass, I think, has a solid value. Game Pass is designed for many people to subscribe to it so that it can actually rake in a lot of revenue and a lot of, profits. But its value is inherently uncontested, even for the already existing 30 plus million Game Pass users. This is why when Xbox did its last summary in terms of its financials, this is why Game Pass grew on PC. Maybe some console players may believe what Colin had just said, but on the PC side, we are laughing and saying this has got to be the biggest joke. This introduction to this video. I mean, no offense to him, but he may have rose-tinted lenses. And this is what a console warrior would do sometimes.
And now it's dealing with the fallout, tethered to an increasingly irrelevant console, a completely flatlined subscription service that itself has negatively altered its own audience's spending habits, and
expanded to other audiences where PlayStation can't or is not willing to do. And also PlayStation, Colin, understands that Microsoft's business is a multi-pronged strategy encompassing subscription, console, and PC. So even if the console base is not as high as PlayStation's console base, like y'all would make it sound, or you guys want to claim that it's irrelevant, which it's not, they are still in a position where they are competitive and has put Sony behind, according to Sony. I think Icarus might be PlayStation, from my suspicion. I don't know. I'm not going to go ahead and make that claim, but I hypothetically think that this video might be a projection video just from 124. It's my perception, but I have to keep watching to fairly make that claim if I have to.
Forcing it into the realm of third-party publishers, just so it can monetarily support its sprawling network of developers, publishers, and games that it has no hope of recouping the cost of in its own space.
Okay, that is a claim. Let's see if that claim is actually true. It has no hope of recouping the cost of. What does that even mean? From what I understand, and Colin talks about it in this video, Xbox was able to maintain over the course of the Xbox One console generation, when they were getting smoked, majority of its studios. In this video, Colin highlights some of the studios that got closed, but even in a very trying time, they were able to do this. And if you look at what the FTC trials basically revealed, their operating margin and their, other marginal aspects in terms of profitability and stuff, they were still here to stay. They stayed alive through it. Why? Because they were offering their games on PC and they were selling. And so if costs were not being recouped, how are all these studios that were basically, existing back then, how were they here now? In fact, if they were not recouping their costs, or they had no way to recoup their costs, why did they go on investing in games? So this claim makes no sense to me, because market analysts and financial analysts within Xbox and Microsoft would have already taken account of their numbers. I mean, if anything, you know what? Let's get to the Activision side. Hopefully, we'll see what Colin has to say about that.
It's quite the fall from grace. And if you look up and squint, you may see Icarus silhouetted against the sun, flailing as he drops. Or maybe that's Phil Spencer and Matt Booty. Who knows?
So, Icarus, if you look up and squint, you'd have to squint to see it, right? Yet, Phil Spencer has been here, and PlayStation has shifted multiple executives in the last 2 years since they made the move to acquire Activision Blizzard King and Bethesda together. And yet, his Icarus, he's rising in his rank and influence in the gaming industry, expanding Xbox's ecosystem. PlayStation has flailed and shown their hand when Jim Ryan was running all over the world, telling everybody this particular statement: our business will never remain the same if our business will never recover if Microsoft degraded Call of Duty on PlayStation. They already degraded Call of Duty on PlayStation by giving it a same version. So Jim Ryan basically, except he's lying here, showed that PlayStation's business was pretty much operating on a mirage. That's why you see 7% margin when all is said and done in one quarter. Yet, according to him, Booty and Phil are Icarus, but you'd have to see it in squint, because if you opened your eyes, you'd see the exact picture that, you'd need to squint your eyes to interpret for. A very interesting premise. Let's keep going, though.
Before this video goes any further, though, I do want to be clear. Until this generation of consoles, I think Xbox's presence on the market wasn't only competitive, but fueled by a lot of really great decisions.
This is where a little history he gives about Xbox. And honestly, I would love to cut this part out because it really is a lot of exposition. But again, for the sake of brevity and for the sake of what it is, I strongly believe that Colin Moriarty, at this point now, having listened to some of his videos and some of his takes on Xbox, I strongly believe, Colin, that you have PlayStation rose-tinted lenses. Because I remember the very first time I encountered a clip from you that I put on the channel, you said that this generation, Xbox didn't even show up. Yet, somehow, their investment into their ecosystem is based on greed? When they're offering the best value to their customers and PlayStation considers their moves as a threat. And PlayStation has basically lost its main exec at the time that was actually making moves to compete against Xbox and push them out of business. And somewhere, somehow, Xbox has fallen from grace to being a third-party publisher, as if the word third-party publisher is a slur. Rockstar would have a word with you if being a third-party publisher is actually a bad thing. Actually, sorry, PlayStation would have a word with you if being a third-party publisher is such a bad thing. Oh, y'all didn't know that publishing your games on other platforms like, Steam, Nintendo, and giving your publishing rights to somebody else to publish on Xbox, you didn't know that's third party?
Help bend the arc of gaming history towards some really laudable end goals. Even in its lone strong generation from a sales and market penetration perspective, the Xbox 360 era, it still came in last place when compared to its contemporaries in the form of PlayStation 3 and Nintendo's Wii, which both outsold it, each doing so with a year less time on the market.
So, Xbox was already getting outsold by other providers, and yet somehow when they devise a strategy years into their own, market cycle, to actually mitigate the inevitable, decline in their hardware sales because they don't have the popularity. In fact, they made a critical mistake in the Xbox One generation that probably, speed ran that decline in terms of their popularity and console sales, numbers. Colin Moriarty is saying that they're greedy and being Icarus because they pivoted the business strategy and they changed the game on y'all. Y'all were fighting console wars, and they said, now we're going to make a new game and set the rules. It's content wars. Now, even with that, PlayStation is bludgeoned. PlayStation has the consoles, doesn't have the content. Interesting, isn't it? I think this is what's driving the very heavy negative response to Xbox. Even if Xbox was given a bar of gold with Game Pass right now, like if they say, subscribe to Game Pass and we'll give you a bar of gold, I guarantee you these folk are going to find a way to turn that into a negative thing. And I just showed you from a calculator's perspective that this is what you're going to be gifted by owning Game Pass from October to May. October of last year to May of this year. October, November, December, January, February, March, April, May. 7 months of Game Pass subscriptions, you will have played over $400 worth of video games for a fee if you buy Game Pass at the less than $10 price point of $80. What an exchange. And somehow this right here, it's greedy, it's Icarus.
A lot of this, unsurprisingly, has to do with games, which will get us to where we sit with Xbox today. And for a while, Xbox had its own run of really high-quality exclusive offerings from both first and second party, not to mention the copious third-party timed and permanent exclusives it courted, something Xbox and many of its fans are mighty critical of today, but which it pursued arguably more zealously than any hardware manufacturer ever at one point in its history. Think Mass Effect, BioShock, and Dead Rising as key examples. The original Xbox was known for Halo and later on the first Forza racer. Xbox 360 threw Gears of War into the mix, still with more Halo and Forza. Then Xbox One with, Halo, Gears of War, and Forza. And today we have Halo, Gears of War, and Forza, and a hell of a lot more too, thanks to studio and publisher purchases over the last 5 years.
I mean, PlayStation did basically the same thing. An audience member sent me a video, which I watched, by the way. Shout out to you, Marvin. You sent me this video about how PlayStation took this video right here. How PlayStation basically took over the studio that was making Madden, and then that studio has now become Sony San Diego. And in the video, the gentleman talked about how they acquired Psygnosis, who was a significant publisher back then. So this is a practice, and acquisitions. I think, again, people want to make acquisitions look like they're bad things or whatever it is. But in gaming, depending on how the acquisition was actually, done, I mean, I can't sit here and speak to the morality of it. I feel like if a business is in a position where they want to expand and they take on another publisher or another game studio, that's fine. I mean, if they have the money to do so and it's going to yield them benefits, because PlayStation, has also acquired entire studios, entire publishers. Bungie was publishing their game. There was their own publisher when they were acquired by PlayStation. And so that should not be, a bad thing. I keep opening this video because I think it's very interesting.
But now it doesn't really matter because PlayStation and Nintendo will also have Halo, Gears of War, and Forza. And
okay, Halo Gears of War is not confirmed yet to be going to other platforms. Forza is confirmed, yes, but Halo and Gears are yet to be confirmed. I mean, what do I care? I don't like exclusivity, you know what I mean? But still, though, I just wanted to make sure, this is celebratory news for me. This is why my brain can't comprehend how you not having exclusives is a bad thing, while he considers that if you don't have exclusives, you've fallen from grace, right? So we're at odds with our own conclusions. However, the reality is PlayStation themselves doesn't even have many more exclusives, and everything is coming to PC. So if we had to use Colin Moriarty's framework, PlayStation has also fallen from grace. Yeah.
All of the other stuff too, thus relegating the Xbox brand to Sega status, which is undeniable.
Sega status? Hold on. Sega's valuation is a market cap of about $4.2 billion and $3.89 billion. Game Pass alone in 2021 made about $3 billion 4 years ago and is expected to make about $5 billion in 2025. But the entire Sega's Sammy Holdings is valued at $4 billion. That claim doesn't hold scrutiny, Colin. I mean, I know it's like a talking point on the internet and stuff, but from any serious person, that's a console war talking point that you've put in an editorial. Maybe in the future, desist from saying it. Find other means to disparage Xbox or hold them in a critical light, I guess. I mean, right? Please, it's so funny.
Great for the bottom line, but frankly ominous at best if you're ingratiated in that ecosystem. Now,
ominous at best. Giving the impression that something bad or unpleasant is going to happen, threatening or it's only in y'all's eyes though that you guys are seeing that. I mean, how else would I put it?
Now, I'm a 40-year-old man, and mentally I'm more like 75, so I really shouldn't be using terminology like this. But this entire meltdown has created an enormous amount of what the kids today call cope within facets of the Xbox fanbase. And we're going to...
Kids? Nah, that's more millennials. Kids are not using those. Well, again, I don't know what his exposure to kids and their, different age groups are, but... okay.
Get into all of that too, but for now, let's stay focused on just what went wrong and how Xbox flew too close to that darn stubborn star our planet is hurtling around.
I'm curious though, if flying to a star, and while you're at it, everybody is trying to stop you. And that Icarus is own. See, when Jim Ryan was speaking to, regulators, right? And the FTC was dragging them through. See, look at this. I mean, we remember, man. Jim Ryan flew to Brussels to talk to regulators about Microsoft, Activision Blizzard. A report claims the Sony Interactive CEO personally visited the European Union headquarters to voice PlayStation's concerns regarding Microsoft's acquisition of Activision Blizzard. In the Icarus story, I don't think, anyone was concerned about how Icarus flying to the sun was going to affect them. Perhaps his dad. So PlayStation was Xbox's dad and concerned, Xbox may hurt themselves. You know what I mean? Like, I don't understand. I mean, think about it. I'm not getting the gist here. I don't know, man. Let me keep listening.
As I assume you already know well enough, Xbox's fortunes started changing markedly in 2013, just as soon as Microsoft revealed their Xbox One console that spring.
Yep.
And it's fair to say
Laura Fryer has talked about this. This was a big botch.
That they never really regained a foothold from that point on. The Xbox 360 generation, it turned out, was a complete mirage, and they've been chasing that high ever since. Much has been made in the years that have elapsed about just what went wrong, but it's fair to say that the situation presented a sort of death by a thousand cuts. Especially surprising since PlayStation 3 itself had Sony's gaming vertical on the ropes in its first couple of years on the market. Microsoft could have vanquished Sony from this space, but they failed to do so, and a major reason was games. but it was also a presentational issue and ironically a services issue, something Xbox hadn't whiffed on very much in previous generations. For starters, and we won't linger too long here because it's a frankly very boring topic at this point, the entire idea of centering your console in your life and watching TV, sports, and so on via it wasn't a bad one. Xbox One, like say On Live before it or Google's Stadia since, arrived at obvious conclusions, but their timing was all wrong. I watch Jets games through YouTube on my PS5. I watch Islanders games through ESPN Plus on my...
So basically positioning then. Xbox was positioned way too early. They're always ahead of the curve, is what you're saying? Well, if you're admitting that, if you're going to admit this, Colin, then you got to admit that this is also ahead of its time and you just don't understand it at the moment or can't see how much of an impact it has on the gaming industry. PlayStation does. You know what's funny about it, right?
PS5. I stream TV and movies through apps on my PS5. Now, some might say a smart TV can do all of that, and they're right, but that's entirely my point. The TV Call of Duty sports shit that everyone made fun of doesn't actually seem so insane in hindsight. It's just that timing is everything. Hell, Sega was giving people digital access to games literally 30 years ago on the Sega Channel. Fighting and sports players were playing SNES and Genesis games online with X-Band in 1994, and so on. Let's not forget that if Xerox had any foresight, they would have dominated the home computer industry with the technologies that they didn't care about or understand, but very much invented. You know, the mouse, the GUI, Ethernet, the laser printer, those little chestnuts.
I gotta say, I think Colin Moriarty's worldview is dominated by the companies that can dominate in a specific area. If these companies did not make these mistakes, it would not have created a competitive environment for other people to see opportunity and enter. And, you can't see everything. You know what I mean? You can't see everything. And in some cases, a business model may not look like it's strong, but might be just the winning business model at the end of the day. If anything, I think Phil Spencer has made some of the most critical business moves to take Xbox from a poop show in the Xbox One generation to basically the most dominant publisher that you can find on earth right now. And he did it from inheriting trash. You have to think about it that way. For this conclusion to come about, this comes from a dedicated disdain for Xbox as a whole. Because anybody who will look back at what he said just now, a second ago, that Xbox's fortunes started to change around the Xbox One generation, where he showed the former Xbox guy that basically said, it seems we've made a device for people who are not interested. And if you're not interested in it, and the Xbox 360 is available, somebody who basically verbally killed the Xbox brand. And then they give that to Phil Spencer to do something with. And he's taking it now to pretty much making it something in a market that's rapidly changing. I don't know how this video even got made. You know what I mean? Like, this video, anyone with an objective framework will look at this video and say, wow, these conclusions are outlandish.
What I'm saying is that timing and foresight is the whole equation. Sometimes you win, but oftentimes you lose. Many times losing is your own fault. That's life. Now, I can hear you screaming through your screens, what about the game sharing thing? Surely that helped kill Xbox as we knew it too. In the short term, there's no doubt that's true. The Shuhei Yoshida Adam Boys video is perhaps the single most legendary E3 moment in the history of the now defunct trade show.
This is how you share your games on PS4. Thanks.
PlayStation.
And it constituted the biggest punch in the face one console manufacturer had delivered to another since PlayStation undid Sega's console business once and for all at the turn of the century.
Again, you see how he's like happy that happened, or maybe he seems like that's an okay thing, right? That that doesn't spell greed. That doesn't spell flying close to the sun, because PlayStation is dominating or whatever it is, I guess. $299. I remember seeing this years later. I didn't know what was going on.
But I'd argue that as much as that hurt, and as much as the TV sports Call of Duty thing injured the brand too, all of it could have been made better if only the console had some killer games on it. And the reality is, this is where Xbox truly botched things, and why they never really recovered.
This is where this gentleman right here and his team truly botched things. And you see, again, why I say that is because he's directed, and if we go back to the video, he's directed Icarus as being attributed to Matt Booty, but the crash of the Xbox One generation is not attributed to this executive who is single-handedly responsible for having caused it and his team. Is anybody sensing the irony here?
But only the console had some killer games on it. And the reality is, this is where Xbox truly botched things, and why they never really recovered.
Oh, botch. I botched that one. Oh, that's a botch job.
Bad messaging can be overcome, and some bad experiences can too. The PS3 launched with a digital storefront running on a browser, for God's sake. Its controller was a hollow version of its previous gen controller because it abandoned its new design too late in the process to make something fresh. The PlayStation Network was catastrophically hacked and went down for weeks in 2011. But Sony realized something absolutely vital that Microsoft never quite grasped. Great games can fix just about anything. Without them, the machines would flounder, but with those games, with a catalog that keeps people fixated, engaged, and playing, all could be made right again. Sony...
In the PS5 generation, that belief is not being acted upon appropriately. Are you seeing what's going on here? However, on the Xbox side, that belief is being heavily invested in. I mean, I come from the outside and I look at this, and I'm my second biggest gaming library is on PlayStation, by the way. Right? But I'm looking at it and saying, PlayStation has given me no reason to turn on my PlayStation 5 this generation at all. Nothing. When they made the Marvel Spider-Man 2 game, I even lost confidence in their ability to write good superhero stories. And I'm looking at Wolverine going, sale. Like, it's crazy that's how much it's affected me as somebody who would play these PlayStation games. Right? So great games can fix anything, right? Right, Colin? However, when they bring great games, you say that they're Icarus and they're being greedy. This is a very, very set of incoherent, arguments. Like, I can't find, if I draw a line, the line's going to be all over the place because the rose-tinted lenses are on. This is a fanboy lens on here. No doubt about it. Like, I'm over here looking at the logical workings of everything and what's being said, and it's very interesting to see that, man, great games can fix everything? What do you mean by great games? Is that a subjective interpretation of somebody else's, preference for video games? Okay.
His ability to capture people with the PlayStation 4 in particular, all the while Xbox One languished, really does matter. It forced Xbox to make some bold decisions to survive, no doubt. We'll finally get into all of that shortly, but I'd say a blatant over-reliance on the aforementioned Halo, Gears, and Forza trifecta hurt a great deal too. Sony knows how to move on, or at least it did. That's how Naughty Dog went from Crash Bandicoot to Jak and Daxter to Uncharted to The Last of Us to Intergalactic, or how Sucker Punch went from Sly Cooper to Infamous to Ghost, and so many other examples. You get the idea. You don't think there could be 15 Uncharted games by now? Trust me when I say there certainly could be. But then you look at the other side, Halo, Gears, and Forza, and Halo, Gears, and Forza, and Halo, Gears, and Forza is only going to get you so far. You need to do way more.
Yeah, they agree. They do. They are doing way more than Halo, Gears, and Forza. Am I right?
No doubt that Microsoft identified this problem and acted. Indeed, it's how their flight towards the sun began in the first place.
How? I can't. What?
To solve their games problem, Microsoft did a few things. For starters, they continued to aggressively court timed and outright third-party exclusives, the thing that's very much not okay unless they do it. So,
hold on. You mean this one that they got lambasted for in the same generation that PlayStation was doing the same thing? I remember lambasting Microsoft for this Rise of the Tomb Raider. Remember, I've told you guys this particular situation before, right? I said, I cussed out Microsoft. I was like, man, this stupid company, blah, 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 blah. Basically, locking this game down. I can't get to play because I played the other game. While in the same generation, PlayStation locked out Street Fighter V from Xbox after having had people play the other Street Fighter 4 game on Xbox as well. And he's saying it's okay if, Xbox does it. Colin, that is a misinterpretation of the facts. That is a misinterpretation of the facts. Let me see. They paid $100 million for an exclusive deal for this. That's crazy. That's crazy. That's crazy. They got robbed, and yet they got lambasted online. Yet, when PlayStation Money had its Street Fighter, I'm not seeing you say that that was not okay. Because PlayStation has thrived on money hiding and locking games away from Xbox. He can't say that because PlayStation's business model is predicated on that predatory practice, which I dislike. Anybody does it anyways. I don't care who you are.
You got the likes of the original Titanfall, and you got Rise of the Tomb Raider and the marketing hullabaloo that circulated around that too. At some point though, Microsoft realized it needed to beef up its first-party presence in particular.
No, it realized that it can't do anything PlayStation is doing without having the PR nastiness attached to it, I guess. I just wanted to put that in there. I mean, that might be... That's just me pointing out what I see.
Which during this early to mid Xbox One generation was woefully underperforming compared to its rivals. You had the Coalition, founded in 2010 to shepherd the Gears of War franchise that Microsoft ultimately purchased from Epic, its original developer. You had Rare, which at this point was a shadow of a shadow of a shadow of its former Nintendo-owned self, though they've since emerged as a vital piece of Xbox's publishing equation. You had Lionhead, a vanity purchase for Microsoft that cratered for years before finally going away in 2016, 6 years after it released Fable 3, its final AAA release. Ensemble Studios delivered Halo Wars...
Hold on. Wouldn't that be almost equal to Firewalk in a sense? Some of you have said that they were developing Fable and they mismanaged the funds. That's what happened.
Before being unceremoniously shuttered in 2009, and way back in 2007, Microsoft let Bungie walk away for some reason. I mean, it was truly dire. Other than Mojang, the studio behind Minecraft, and a truly ingenious purchase by Microsoft.
Microsoft made a smart decision letting Bungie walk away. Why? Because you, Colin, in your last video, you called Bungie a lemon.
Which happened in 2014. Xbox's first-party offerings barely existed during this period. By 2018, though, all of that changed. Microsoft began to take flight, doing what it had to do without nearly flying too close to the sun. Indeed, the moves they were to make seemed like exactly what the doctor ordered, and you certainly can't argue with at least some of them. You could easily make a case for all of them. The powers that be realized that Microsoft is far from an inherently creative company, and it's unlikely they'd be able to overcome the gap in quality games comparable to Nintendo or Sony without lots of outside help, which they...
And Sony is creative? Okay, I guess. I guess. I don't know.
Aggressively sought, but these moves also made the sun that much hotter. At E3 in 2018, Microsoft made a huge splash when it announced the purchase of a variety of seemingly random third-party developers, the keywords being seemingly random, we'll get back to that would help build Xbox's badly languishing first-party family into something more respectable. Some of these purchases were totally sensible. For instance, Xbox brought in-house 2 second parties that fit their approach perfectly, in the form of Forza Horizon dev Playground Games and State of Decay dev Undead Labs. These guys already delivered for Xbox, so putting a ring on it is great. More mysteriously, perhaps, they purchased Compulsion Games, which, as I write and record this, is on the precipice of releasing its first Xbox game all of these years later in the form of South of Midnight.
What has Compulsion Games been doing all this while? Another thing is some of these studios, when they actually acquire them, they work on other projects. So 2010, Team Growth, Canadian Game Awards, Journey Begins, Montreal, Open Positions. Interesting. Our content creation policy. Okay. So basically they were a sleeper studio in a sense. Games. Let's see what their games are. We Happy Few, Contrast. Did they work on We Happy Few? Did they help with it? Or was this a game that they had made before they were acquired? They seem to be a really small studio. So it's a very small acquisition in a sense, right? That's my guess. Something that would have cost Xbox a very small amount of money. So pretty much, this would probably be an organic studio growth that many claim that PlayStation does better. In my opinion anyways, I guess.
They also snagged maybe the biggest head scratcher of them all in the form of Ninja Theory, which makes beautiful games, no doubt, but as we saw with Hellblade 2 last year, no one really cares.
Hold on, Colin. Yeah, I'm not going to let you get away with that one. Did Ninja Theory's game, the first one, not get money hatted by PlayStation? Hellblade, Senua's Sacrifice. Right? Hellblade Senua's Sacrifice, PlayStation exclusive. So how is this a head scratcher when PlayStation saw their game as valuable enough to money hat and block from going to Xbox for a year, yet when Xbox acquires them, it's a head scratcher? Ah, come on now. Come on now. Y'all claim that Xbox is not investing in these studios and all of this stuff. Yeah, PlayStation is basically using them and dumping them, or whatever you want to call it. And yet these guys have basically gone to, under Xbox's wings, and somehow it's a head scratcher to you. The game's coming to PlayStation. Let's see if PlayStation players think they don't care, right? Well, the rumors anyways. Guys, this is such a biased video. I don't know. Let's keep going, though.
By the next year, 2019, Microsoft had already invested in RPG studio Obsidian, arguably their smartest choice and to this day their most prolific, Insomniac-like churner of product, as well as the eclectic team Double Fine, which itself hasn't brought a game from embryo to market under Xbox's tutelage, at least not yet. The point here is that they were beefing up, even founding a couple of teams from scratch during this time, the incredibly productive RTS studio World's Edge, and the shockingly incompetent The Initiative, which is now on its 8th calendar year with no launch.
Relax, Colin. Firewalk doesn't exist, so you gotta chill. I mean, like, really, this is another problem that we have here. This categorization of studios being incompetent and all this stuff and head scratcher and all that. If you look at it in context as to what PlayStation, not Icarus PlayStation, is doing, you can't come up with these conclusions without having a bias against Xbox. Hands down, this is probably one of the most biased editorials I've seen or listened to. Oh my gosh.
Yet even these moves weren't enough, because Microsoft made another decision this time around that would force them to up the ante even further.
What was going on around this time? I mean, was PlayStation not making it hard for Microsoft to be Microsoft by money hatting all these other third-party games as well that PlayStation itself depends on? That shows to actually have more sales on PlayStation's ecosystem than PlayStation's first-party games, even though PlayStation first-party games are touted to be these creative, quality games. Context is very, very important.
Having a PlayStation-sized first-party family, which is what they had around 2019, would still be woefully inadequate to feed Game Pass.
I doubt it.
And it's Game Pass.
How he made Compulsion Games and Obsidian Insomniac-like in terms of their, capabilities, or in terms of their, bandwidth, is kind of strange, because they don't have, a freaking established multi-decade IP like Spider-Man that they work on. Right? Because if you look at Ratchet & Clank sales numbers, and if you look at Resistance sales numbers of their other games, those sales are not impressive as a whole. I mean, guys, somebody help me. It wasn't until Marvel Spider-Man that Insomniac really saw a game that it made soar. Very interesting saying that that's a PlayStation-like family of studios. No one.
Ultimately, that brings us to where we are today. Now, if I've said it once, I've said it 1,000 times. Microsoft actually made a sensible and potentially even smart decision by spooling Game Pass up back in 2017.
Really? You said that it was actually based on greed at the beginning of your video. Okay, I don't know. Let's keep listening, though. Maybe there's something here I'm missing.
Especially if you're examining the move through the lens of the time. It realized it was losing badly on the console market, unable to court adequate numbers of new players to the space based on old rules, so they tried to change the rules. And who could blame them? In their position at the time, I would have championed a similar approach, particularly with the runaway success of other subscription and streaming services that took parallel media silos, think TV, movies, and music, and turned those spaces upside down.
Hold on. Before Game Pass, they were already gearing up for their games to go on PC, with Quantum Break being the very first game in 2016. So their efforts were already changing in a multi-pronged approach. This is why PlayStation seemed a little, kind of like off their game when Activision was bound to be acquired, because they realized that there's a PC greater possibility potential over even subscription that's not being highlighted here. So I think Colin is about to make a beeline for the subscription, but he's about to miss the biggest bag that Xbox had actually created on the PC platform and Steam at the time. Because again, this is going to pretty much, and I haven't watched the rest of this part yet. We're about to get to an anti-Xbox Game Pass section. I think this is what's going to unfold. I don't know. I may be wrong. I hope I'm wrong.
Why would video games be immune to this trend? As we know now being the operative word, the reality is that most people have no interest whatsoever in a wide-ranging gaming sub, because unlike the churning nature of film, TV, and especially music, people spend way too much time with individual games for a broad subscription to make any sense to an enormous number of potential customers.
Yet, Game Pass grew on PC in this quarter's announcement. Video was made 21 hours ago, so this video is made in context of having had that information, right? PlayStation Plus, the subscription services, is also growing its offerings to offer its gamers and has created multiple tiers. Interesting.
But that was unknown, and perhaps even unknowable back in 2017. We had no data, so they made the leap and it seemed logical enough. But the reality is that a subscription service like that needs lots and lots of content, and though you can go and license it, it would likely be more efficient to simply make as many of the games as you could on your own. This is something virtually all of the streaming services and other entertainment silos outside of music have since learned. By 2020, Xbox Game Studios was in a more powerful position than ever before, but again, they weren't trying to sell games a la carte. They needed a constant stream of content to keep people engaged in their subscription on a monthly basis.
They already had that with third-party games. This is also another challenge, too, that a lot of people are, in some cases, usually forgetting is the subscription service is not just filled with, Xbox games. There are games everywhere. You can even come in and say, oh, Xbox Studio Games, and you can look at Xbox Studio Games, and really, there are not a lot of them, right? So when Game Pass kicked off, it already had its Xbox Studio Games available for everybody, but from 2017 and such, they started to court and chase third-party offerings on Game Pass, which they saw a lot of positive response, where other developers were willing to put their games on their subscription service far and wide. Everyone was putting their games on Game Pass before Activision Blizzard King or Bethesda was actually, acquired. Like Sega, a lot of companies they seemed open to that idea and were acting upon it. That's where Game Pass actually had a very strong suit. Now, I remember a lot of PlayStation players saying, well, I have access to most of these games on PlayStation. So inherently, it wasn't really different until they decided that in order for them to basically go ahead and top PlayStation, they needed to make a difference and thereby bring in their day one games, the difference maker. If he thinks this is Icarus, the gaming community thinks it's a value proposition. Again, there's no way he can beat the allegations of being extremely biased against Xbox.
So they had to go even deeper. At this point, Icarus wasn't flying too close to the sun at all, but his altitude was increasing. Remember, signing up to Game Pass for a couple of months to play, say, Starfield is a bad financial proposition for Microsoft, full stop. They just made, say, $40 max on you, but they would have made $70 if you just bought it.
Okay, hold on. It's a bad value proposition if you're tunnel visioned to only seeing that. But if you also just have a little bit of creativity to realize that the game is still going to sell on Xbox for people who want to buy it, it will sell on PC, on Steam for people who want to buy it, it will sell on PC, on Xbox for people who want to buy it. And also, it potentially can go sell on PlayStation now. And let's not even put the PlayStation 1 there yet, because he's not there. But if you could only just look at that one possibility, and he said Starfield, right? All right, let's go. Which basically was one of the top selling games in 2023 on Steam. So, Mr. Moriarty, you may consider it a bad proposition if you're only looking at it. But PlayStation is smarter than that. They're looking at the overall broader picture, the one that a lot of people aren't looking at. And you see that the entire conversation is that this subscription fee goes in and gives Game Pass a sizable market share, while the rest are the game sales. I think you're about to explain Xbox's genius.
They need you to stay put, or the entire notion of Game Pass unravels. They needed more. Thus, near the end of 2020, Microsoft revealed that they weren't going to purchase individual studios, but rather entire publishers. This brings ZeniMax into the fold, which we lovingly refer to as Bethesda, the publisher, not to be confused with its flagship developer, which we also call Bethesda. This was a seismic move that ultimately cost Microsoft more than $8 billion, making it by far the largest M&A deal in the history of the console games industry at the time. And
$8 billion? More than $8 billion? I thought it was $7.5 billion.
outside of its purchase of Skype and LinkedIn, the biggest deal Microsoft itself had ever made also at that time. Keep that factoid in mind for use later, it's important. Buying Bethesda and its legion of well-respected studios, key amongst them Doom developer id Software, Wolfenstein team Machine Games, and Dishonored dev Arcane, not to mention Western RPG powerhouse Bethesda Game Studios itself, would further help lubricate the wheels of commerce on Game Pass and premise. And again, this wasn't a horrible idea on paper. It's just that there are two really important pieces of the puzzle that Microsoft and its C-suite didn't quite anticipate. That owning all of these resources is very expensive and thus very risky in a walled garden, and that spending all this money would undoubtedly bring company-wide attention to the Xbox vertical in ways the brand never had to grapple with before.
In a walled garden? They weren't intending to wall garden these games, though. Maybe they may have flirted with the idea, but it was already obvious that they were not intending to wall garden a lot of these games. In fact, they said that these games are going to be on a case-by-case basis, and then Starfield was going to be exclusive. Right? Or I don't know what the transition is for them actually making the different claims that were made as they were adjusting to the new business and to the new asset that they just acquired.
Remember, for many years, Xbox was such an insignificant part of Microsoft's business that it basically amounted to a rounding error. Since money in was never amazing, and since money out was never that concerning either, no one really paid attention to what Xbox was doing internally. Investors couldn't care less either. But all of that would begin to change with the Bethesda purchase, and as we'll find out a little later in this video, the pressure would be heightened even further by orders of magnitude. Icarus's wings weren't quite melting at this point, but he sure was starting to warm up. At the point Microsoft purchased Bethesda, it was fairly clear that virtually any entity in gaming was on the table for acquisition, and indeed, mega embarrassing internal correspondence between Xbox executives makes it clear that they were looking to buy pretty much anything.
Mega embarrassing? Because they tried to buy Warner Brothers? Mega embarrassing? What's up with this cat, man?
And anyone in the industry, which better puts into perspective the hodgepodge of teams they would buy beginning in 2018. There was absolutely no rhyme or reason to the moves outside of growth because indeed there was no rhyme or reason to the moves. They just wanted more. Game Pass was...
They just wanted more? For who? For their subscribers? To Game Pass? There was no rhyme or reason, yet they just wanted more? Right after you just said that the content was not enough for those who may have been subscribing to the ecosystem? Bro.
Becoming an unwieldy beast, and it needed to feed. Could Microsoft purchase Warner Brothers? It was certainly considered. Could they buy Sega? There was interest. Square Enix? They wanted that too. The reality is they were interested in everyone, audaciously enough even Nintendo itself. Remember, of course, that Microsoft tried to buy Nintendo outright in the years leading up to the original Xbox, a story told throughout time as Nintendo executives laughing the Microsoft suits out of the room. But they were going to try again on that front too.
Hey, Nintendo may have laughed. They may have laughed. But those grins are changing because Xbox is now taking a very aggressive approach. That's the thing. You can laugh, though. Oh, okay.
Phil Spencer himself, the head of Xbox for many years, noted it would be a so-called career moment for him if he were to snag Nintendo. Honestly, if you read the correspondence, you'd be hard-pressed to find a gaming developer or publisher of any consequence not in Microsoft sights.
Of course, you have money and you're trying to acquire more content. You're not going to think about acquiring them. Do we even know what PlayStation has been trying to acquire? In fact, if you read these leaks from the Insomniac hack, you'll see that PlayStation realized that it couldn't acquire these content pieces. If you read other leaks that came out at the same time, you'll realize that they actually went ahead and said, man, we just don't have the money for this. But Microsoft had the money, so why not?
It was at this point that I personally, as an analyst, industry expert, and player of games, had alarms going off in my head.
Industry expert? Analyst? I don't know, bro. You have to at least maintain some level of objectivity to make that claim. I won't easily give that to you. Maybe there's more work that needs to be done. I've looked at your conclusions. And it's very... Oh, man.
These dudes had absolutely no plan outside of growth. They had no strategy. They didn't know what they were doing. Xbox Studios head Matt Booty was sending emails noting that they could spend their competition out of business like that.
Yeah, it's about to work.
That was a viable tactic and not instead an utterly embarrassing admission.
Utterly embarrassing admission? When PlayStation is blocking games from third-party publishers to not let them go on Xbox, they're basically outspending and out-cornering the market from their competitor. And somehow them wanting to spend more back is embarrassing? This is why I'm not giving you the title of analyst. An expert. You don't need expertise to be in the industry. You just need to open your eyes. That's all. This gaming industry is so brain dead easy. Anybody can see what's going on.
If buying the likes of Ninja Theory was weird in 2018, and it certainly was, then finding the logic behind, say, Microsoft owning Paradox or CD Projekt would also be elusive, when their success and the success of all of these other companies was largely predicated on a spreadshot approach. It's why Sony never purchased studios it didn't work with first, and when it did, like say Bungie or Firewalk, it didn't work out very well, did it? Growth for growth's sake.
Oh. It never purchases studios it didn't work with first? It never did that? But it purchases publishers that it didn't work with first. Like Psygnosis. Did it work with Psygnosis at first? Or it just outrightly acquired them? Or maybe it did work with them. But that's a weird conundrum though. Because again, if we actually talk about that, did Xbox not work with Bethesda to get games to console? So is that a standard? So I guess Xbox passes that standard. And with Activision, that was basically a power play. Or did they work with Activision at some point in time? Over many years with Call of Duty and such? So if what I'm hearing is Colin is basically qualifying that sound studio or publisher acquisition needs to be predicated by having worked with them first. Xbox still made smart choices in this case, but he can't acknowledge that, can he? Bruh.
Is simply not a viable option in creative fields, especially not in an Xbox ecosystem that was stagnant at best and shrinking at worst. But it's nonetheless an option that Xbox execs pursued with glee and passion, not knowing at the time that the zeal in which they wanted to pursue acquisitions would undo their entire operation as it was then understood.
So think about this. This is Ninja Theory, where the developers said, do y'all remember when Ninja Theory first got acquired? The developer said that they were given they were given creative freedom. That they sat down with Xbox and they basically had a good feeling about the acquisition and they liked the fact that they were there. Their studio head at the time is in an interview having said a lot of these things. Why is he disparaging this acquisition of Hellblade? It's just of Hellblade's developer, Ninja Theory.
Alienate large swaths of their fanbase and force them into becoming a third-party publisher of games, full stop, to everyone's benefit but their own players.
Their own players don't benefit because they're publishing games in other places? Colin Moriarty is making this conclusion? What does the Xbox player lose? They still get the games. They get the games with multiple options. They get the best experience for the games on the Xbox platform, including third-party games available to them. Oh, this is a console war talking point. It's already made its way in here.
Before, I told you that Microsoft's Xbox brand was bringing the Eye of Sauron, or perhaps the Eye of Satya, on itself more and more with each passing quarter. But $8 billion on ZeniMax was nothing compared to what these guys were cooking up next. And if Icarus was feeling a little hot then, the wax would start dripping to the ground below after this next one. The move of all moves, my friends, was Microsoft's pursuit and ultimate acquisition of Activision Blizzard King.
Now, from what we remember, Activision approached Microsoft in this particular regard. So of all their conversations that they were throwing out there, they were still basically shooting low, right? And an opportunity presented itself. An opportunity to make these guys, PlayStation, sweat a little bit. And boy, did they make what I think is the best acquisition play that we've seen in years.
In early 2022, Microsoft revealed that it would purchase the mega publisher behind Call of Duty for a staggering $68.7 billion, some 8.5 times what it spent on Bethesda, a blatantly vast overpay for the entity, but one made as a seeming last-ditch effort to boost Game Pass and further monopolize console gaming resources.
Overpay? Activision valuation before acquisition. In January 2021, Activision's net worth was estimated at $72 billion. The valuation was based on the company's stock price at the time. This is just some AI stuff. In January 2022, Microsoft announced that it will buy Activision for $68.7 billion. This was the most expensive video game acquisition. The deal was valued at $95 per share, which was a nearly 40% increase from the stock price before the announcement. The acquisition was expected to activate EPS and non-GAAP basis. Microsoft expected to become the world's third biggest gaming company in terms of revenue after the acquisition. An overpay or a fair market value? This represents a, let's see what Forbes writes here. This represents a P/EBITDA multiple of 20.4 for the company based on our forecast for Activision Blizzard EBITDA for the current fiscal year. This EBITDA term, someone explained it and I understood it, but it left my memory. Our coverage of Activision Blizzard, which includes Activision Blizzard revenue comparison, their opening income and Activision valuation ratio comparisons, among others, provide more details on the company's financial performance. While Activision stock will likely see higher levels, so it's able to see how its peers stack up. So let's look at some revenue comparisons. So fair market value? I think so. Overpay? I don't think so. Because they had about $14 billion in the bank or something like that. So I don't know about overpay. I think it was more of a fair market value, because what would a company like that even sell for?
It's fair to say that if you care about the Xbox console brand, this deal absolutely blew up in everyone's faces.
Really? No, it blew up in your face and the face of feckle so-called Xbox fanboys. To me, I saw it as them coming in with some heat for the competition, and the competition saw it as a threat. You're only thinking of it, and you say you're an industry analyst, right? So you're thinking of it from just your perspective, not thinking about it from PlayStation's perspective, so I can see how you would come to that conclusion.
And it did so a lot sooner than anyone could have thought possible. The deal, which closed in late 2023, almost immediately undid Microsoft's entire pursuit of exclusivity for its console ecosystem and for Game Pass.
Hold on. Microsoft's pursuit of exclusivity was toast in 2016. Colin, we talked about this. We talked about this when they moved their games to PC. Their pursuit of exclusivity was already gone. In fact, the Crap Gamer and Phil Spencer saga, let's go ahead and find it. I have to find it because, again, this is something that requires a lot of time. I'm not upgrading the premium Twitter. Get the heck out of here. It's in my bookmarks. Right? The Crap Gamer and his conversation with Phil Spencer, I went back and I was looking at it, And Phil Spencer back then had already been saying that he did not want to pursue walled gardens. No, the premise of this video is significantly faulty to exactly the facts that we are aware of. Why does this bring such frustration trying to make sense of talking heads who position themselves as experts and analysts when we have all the information right in front of us? Guys, I'm a school teacher, for crying out loud. And even I can go back and be like, okay, what does this tweet actually say? And how do you actually bring it? I'm trying to get the tweet for you. Hold on. All right, I found it. Here it is. Oh, I had to Google it because I bookmarked it a long time ago, but I couldn't find it. Right here. He said you canceled the pre-order of a game because Greg Gamer was saying he was going to cancel his pre-order for Quantum Break. This went down in February of 2016. Today is February of 2025. Exactly 9 years ago. And Phil Spencer said this. I've said it over and over. We are focused on the best place to play games, to play for gamers, not about creating walls. Really? That their dreams of exclusivity was already shattered with this actually having been years before Activision Blizzard King was acquired? Mojang was acquired and had multi-plat games in 2014, and they still kept those games multi-plat for the big investment. How would Activision Blizzard King have shattered an ambition that they already held and practiced 8-9 years ago?
Overpromising and under-delivering, all the while ensuring that the wider Microsoft entity would very much be paying attention to what Xbox was doing internally, upping the drama. Microsoft spent nearly 3 times more on Activision Blizzard King than the company had ever spent on a single acquisition in its history. And obviously the bean counters were going to be very, very, very interested in how all of this money would be made back.
Made back? Made back? Made back? The money's already made back. It's an asset. It's in their books. If they want to divest of it, they would sell it for basically either the same or more than what it's worth. Made back, they didn't borrow the money. They bought it cash and converted cash that pretty much devalues by inflation, and we're able to get an asset that's increased in value since then. If anything, they've made more money, and judging by the share prices, if we want to go with the bean counter, version, their share price actually rose significantly. Let's go with a 5-year run. 2022, announcement 2021, 2022. Look at the stock price at the time and look at the stock price today. The bean counters are not looking at this and saying, great job. Make it back.
Little did anyone expect that much of the money would be made back by selling not only Activision Blizzard games and not only Bethesda games, but ultimately Xbox Studios games on its competitors' platforms. And that's how we arrived to today, with a totally reformed and reshaped Xbox.
Oh my God, this is what I think is the biggest mental leap I've ever seen. So you mean to tell me that the acquisition of Activision Blizzard King triggered old Xbox games to go to these other platforms? And it wasn't the fact that Bethesda already had an existing audience on these platforms, and Phil already had a notion where he didn't want to create walls, an ambition that he'd been pursuing by putting games on PC and then expanding to keep Xbox Studios sustainable, that moved them there? That Activision Blizzard King is not making enough money multi-platform every year that they would need to now sell Xbox's games on PlayStation to make up for some cost? This is the worst conclusion I've ever seen in my life when the evidence is sitting right here in front of all of us. Wow.
That is now the biggest publisher on its prime competitor's platform.
Because of Call of Duty. I mean, like, really, though, everyone is freaking out, right? Because of Mojang and Minecraft. Overwatch. That came with Activision Blizzard King. These games were always going to be multi-plat. And they're making money. Activision is making significant profits. How has that now led to old Forza that's already made its money, by the way? Age of Empires that's already made its money, by the way. How does that now go into them going to other platforms? He's interpreting the chess play very wrong. Oh, these people are going to wake up and realize that they've been taken for a ride.
Unbelievable. The reality is
This video is unbelievable.
Game Pass is a wildly unsustainable and even destructive product when you consider how it eroded other parts of Xbox's business.
Oh, but PlayStation Plus doing exactly what Game Pass is doing is not. And because Xbox would dare to give value, eroded. Do you remember, guys, eroded. We just ran the numbers. It gives value to the customer. That's the problem here. It's not that it eroded jack squat. It's that your team on PlayStation can't do the same thing without losing their lunch. This is...
If you're putting Call of Duty on Game Pass, a major promise behind the deal with the FTC to get this thing across the finish line, you simply cannot make back that series' insane level of cost by selling Game Pass subscriptions to transient subs for a fraction of what it would cost to just buy the game new. Microsoft no doubt started learning this in the years leading up to the deal, in which fewer and fewer third parties showed any interest in launching games into Game Pass on the back of ever diminishing returns.
Hold on. This is a conclusion that I'm just hearing because, again, you can just fire up Game Pass and look at what's coming down the road. Fewer and fewer? Is Rebellion an Xbox studio? Is Kepler Interactive an Xbox studio? Is 505 Games an Xbox studio with Wu Chang coming later down the road? I don't know, ladies and gentlemen. I think this is a wild leap and a wild claim. Analyst? I doubt it. Fanboy? Just confirmed it.
Xbox taught its own audience not to buy games, but rather subscribe to a service that would give them away at a reasonable monthly fee.
PlayStation players barely even buy PlayStation games. They didn't even have to be taught. I know people want to say this stuff, but inherently just shows that gamers have limited resources and are conscientious about their spending. It's just that's the most valid interpretation of this. And Xbox understands this inherently. Why are PlayStation software sales down compared to third-party games? Anybody care to answer that?
Game Pass is a wonderful pro-consumer idea, no doubt.
So what is your problem with it?
But the numbers don't add up.
How do you mean?
You can just look at Microsoft's recent financials for yourself, wherein, without the Activision deal and the numbers that it added to the bottom line, Xbox's games business would actually be shrinking,
Hold on. Did Game Pass not get credited for actually raising, in the financial report? Was Xbox Game Pass growth on PC not credited for actually being one of the factors that actually did raise its gaming revenue? How is he interpreting this?
I don't need to tell you, is a catastrophic situation for any consumer brand.
Yet PlayStation has a 7% margin with all that spending, and somehow he's not looking at that? Oh.
It's a great idea to buy Bethesda and put Starfield on Game Pass, but how much more could have been made if it was merely sold a la carte?
None of our business. Not my business. Not my business. Not my business. A la carte. But again, ladies and gentlemen, I told you, and this is the DNA of every PlayStation fanboy that I've argued with. These folk don't consider that Xbox has an entire ecosystem on Steam. They don't consider it. In their minds, they can only see the Xbox console as Xbox's business. They are basically way behind what Xbox is doing. And so in their minds, they just, oh man, it's weird.
We'll find out when it comes to PlayStation 5 and Nintendo Switch 2, but the numbers speak for themselves. And this is something that internally, Microsoft executives really understood and even forewarned about, which is likely why other entities seem to be controlling Xbox now, with a series of executive figureheads carrying out directives they didn't and likely still don't believe in.
How do you know? Directives of what? Phil's been saying since 2016 that he does not want to create walls. This video's premise is already destroyed by a single tweet from an Xbox fanboy basically complaining to Phil Spencer. The entire premise of the video. Wow.
It's clear that Phil Spencer and his team have tenuous at best control over the enterprise at this point, contradicting years of messaging and marketing to go in an entirely different direction.
Years of marketing to go in an entirely different direction that they had already gone in 9 years ago? And somehow PlayStation, having published MLB The Show on PlayStation, well, having allowed for MLB The Show to be published on Xbox by MLB, because they could have just walked away from the deal. Please don't give me that MLB wanted nonsense. I'm not in the mood for that. You're going to have to find a better, reason for that. Since 1997 and finally bringing it to Xbox. Not a change of messaging. Herman Holst switching up on PlayStation fans. Having said, oh, just because one AAA game is coming to PlayStation doesn't mean everything else is, has not undermined their entire business yet. Xbox actually carrying out what it had already said and positioned itself is that these are the folks spreading misinformation, and these PlayStation fans are eating it up. That's why they come to my YouTube channel with these arguments, and I got to wonder and scratch my head like, what?
This was the moment that Microsoft flew too close to the sun.
Oh my gosh. I can't, with critical thought and analysis, take this video seriously. Maybe some people might, but oh man.
Its own hubris, it ate more than it needed to. Its eyes were bigger than its stomach. It will now forever rely upon its competitors on the market to support and sustain its own gaming operation.
I'm in pain, bro. It will now rely on others to support its gaming ecosystem, like PlayStation is not doing the exact same thing. Who's buying PlayStation games and whose games are being bought on PlayStation? Would they not be everybody else? If PlayStation, if MLB The Show was not being sold on Xbox, San Diego studios will be thinking about how to close the doors or do something else. This has got to be the craziest thing I've listened to on a Monday morning.
It's a true fall from grace, one the industry very rarely sees, and ironically, these were moves that were cheered on by the biggest Xbox evangelists, adding...
No! He is clearly obfuscating the reality. This cannot be allowed to fly. I understand that a lot of the Xbox content creators, I understand you guys are very cordial gentlemen and stuff. You guys don't like to actually, you guys, I understand y'all's play. I get it. Don't worry. I'll take one for the team. Okay? This one, as a scientist, as somebody who wants to look for the truth from an objective perspective, I'm publishing this video. I made a version of it yesterday, and I thought maybe I should but this? Wow, this?
Extra layers to the drama. None of this would have happened if the Activision deal in particular didn't occur.
No, Colin. The Activision deal threatened all of PlayStation's business and pretty much got its CEO to actually go ahead and confess that their business has been based largely on a mirage where they're selling everybody else's third-party games and all their gamers are playing live service games and not these so-called exclusives, and now somehow it's a bad thing because it's Xbox that has done it. If it was PlayStation that did it, it will be a whole different conversation because PlayStation is responding to this particular business strategy by doing something similar at the scale that it can pull it off. But none of you are over there complaining.
The situation Xbox is now in has everything to do with it, perhaps foreshadowed by the Bethesda deal, but really pushed over the edge by Activision Blizzard King.
Even when they had been saying all the way since 2016. Again, I got to point this evidence to y'all, even though he'd been saying since 2016 that he's not about making walls, that he's about to give gamers more options. Look at this person. This one said, I, for one, feel I'm happy you're giving gamers the option. Keep up the great work, feel. Guys, y'all need to read this thread. Y'all need to read this thread and see back in 2016 that there were Xbox gamers who were cheering this stuff on. You can also go back to 2016 and see that there were PlayStation gamers who were mad at the reality that, what's the name of that game? Horizon Zero Dawn was going to PC, and some PlayStation gamers were cheering it on as well.
We all learn in life to be careful what we wish for. And it's safe to say that a grouping of the loudest Xbox fans got just that.
No, it's Xbox console warriors that wanted to play List Wars. And I have this game sitting on my ecosystem and you don't, that you're actually referring to. At that point, Phil Spencer had already filtered these cats since 2016. It's okay, Colin. We can understand. But there is no world where this tweet exists, this thread exists on Twitter, that you can draw these conclusions. There's no world where Xbox games have always existed here on Steam for about 8 to 9 years that you would draw these conclusions. It's not just there. It's not just there. I'm sorry.
It's here that I want to begin to wrap things up, returning to my conspicuous use of the word cope earlier in the video, a word that old men like me really shouldn't be saying. But sometimes, the thesaurus just doesn't do the needed vocabulary sufficient justice. 2025 marks my 23rd year in the games industry as a so-called professional, so I have a lot of experience here. I've been around the block a few times.
But you haven't run a gaming company. I mean, sorry to say, I haven't, well, let me not say too much.
Point. The loud, boisterous section of the Xbox ecosystem that has for years poisoned the well of console gaming discourse is the very group that most loudly cheered on these acquisitions.
He's taking a jab at Xbox fans. When I, as a PC user and former PlayStation player, have been getting dragged by PlayStation fans for pointing out this market shift. This is a fanboy.
Thinking that it would make Xbox into an exclusives churning machine unlike any you've ever seen.
Those Xbox fans were also mistaken because, again, you and them, Colin, you were all mistaken because y'all did not look at exactly what Phil Spencer was saying 8-9 years ago. Oh, so this is not anybody's fault. This is not Microsoft's fault. This is people who chose to bury their heads in the sand.
Injuring its competitors in the process.
Injuring? Huh? PlayStation blocking games from Xbox did not injure its competitors? Huh?
And in a perfect world with good management and truly talented studios across the board, maybe that would have become reality. But these people were, and I want to emphasize this as much as I can, dead wrong. About as wrong as they could be.
You have a problem with them, and they were dead wrong, and I'm happy that they were wrong.
They were wrong repeatedly.
But look at an editorial. Look at what you're doing in an editorial, bro. What the flip, man?
Unlike any you've ever seen, injuring its competitors in the process. And in a perfect world with good management and truly talented studios across the board, maybe that would have become reality. But these people were, and I want to emphasize this as much as I can, dead wrong. About as wrong as they could be.
I can say your video is super dead wrong too, though. I mean, think about it. In seeing how Phil Spencer has basically said he didn't want to create walls, and you made this conclusion, and had been putting his games on PC for years, and you still made this conclusion, I can say your conclusions are actually quite... They're significantly faulty.
They were wrong repeatedly, unapologetically, aggressively, and consistently. Hearing things now...
I'll put you in that category too, on how you've basically categorized all this.
Like, this is great. Everyone will subsidize Game Pass is pure cope.
It's not. Y'all are about to go buy an Indiana Jones, aren't y'all? Oh, you're not gonna buy it? Y'all will put yourself in a really interesting place. Because what I see is PlayStation fans celebrating the fact that, well, the so-called hyper fans, right? That are going to play these games on PlayStation. Or they're going to show that they don't truly buy games as much as they claim that they do. Either way, the PlayStation fan has locked himself into a box. All of this is pedantic nonsense.
And why would Game Pass need to be subsidized in the first place? Because it's ultimately not working as is?
That's not true. That's not true. Phil Spencer said that Game Pass is profitable, having spent $1 billion or so or more every year bringing in games to the platform, right? And Game Pass doing over $3 billion. It is sustainable without the influence of PlayStation. Do you not see the chess move, though? Do you not see it? So again, you're asking this question, but the answer is right there. Again.
You don't say. Saying more people get these games is true, but also cope.
What do you mean it's also cope? More people get to play the games.
This isn't what many of you were saying just a year ago, and certainly not 2 or 3 or more years before that.
Okay, I found myself in the middle of a console war that was masked as some editorial to showcase what the reality and the truth is, and I've spent over an hour on this video, man. At this point, guys, you can't blame me if I actually close this video and go move on to more productive things for the day. Thanks for watching. If you've indulged me this much, I really do appreciate you guys. Peace out.